William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
Taffet, and I'm here in the studio with Lerone Landis. The late Patti Fink is very late today. She'll be back next week. Yesterday we went to Leslie and Katie's wedding.
Yes. Congratulations to the newlyweds. It was a great ceremony.
Frequent guests, and yeah, I love that Leslie started it with her, what did she call it? She made a speech.
She made a speech. But there was joking and everything going on.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. And congratulations to the newlywed couple. Our guest today is Scott Poggensee. Scott is making a documentary about a murder that took place here in Hunt County. The person who was accused of it was a gay 19-year-old. And Scott, welcome to the show. Why don't you explain the connection to our community and why we're talking about a murder on Pride Day?
Oh, absolutely. Hi, thank you for having me. So basically, Brandon Woodruff, he grew up in Dallas area. He went to Rockwall High School, graduated from Rockwall High School, and his parents moved when Brandon went to college at Abilene Christian. During his freshman year, they moved out to Roy City, which is in Hunt County. And so they were downsizing, and they were just trying to live as empty nesters. And unfortunately, within a couple months of this new happy life, they ended up being murdered.
So we think that Brandon was at the house in Heath.
The house in Heath.
Okay, it's
easy for you to say.
We think he was at the house in Heath. The parents were murdered at the house in Royce City. For people who don't know the geography, Heath faces Lake Ray Hubbard. It's just south of Rockwall on Lake Ray Hubbard. Hunt County is to the east of Collin County.
East of Rockwall County. As you're driving out 30 towards Greenville, Roy City is right there on the.
So we're talking about how far apart?
It takes about 25 minutes to drive from each house, but the counties butt up against each other. So, from the house that they had, the new house that they had in Roy City, and the old house that they had in Heath is about 25-minute drive.
And one of the things that was, or a lot of the things that came up at trial, showed that there was very little evidence. Showed that, and we're going to talk about all this, but I just want to lay the groundwork. There's very little evidence. One of the things that was brought up was, and the night of the murder, he was at S4.
Yeah.
Well, to me, that shows that you didn't just kill your parents. It kind of shows, if you're out partying, it shows that you had no idea about what had happened that day. Right. So tell us a little bit about Brandon. He was 19 and going to Abilene Christian.
Yeah, this was his freshman year. He was involved in, he immediately started off involved in the drama department. He was in the freshman follies. He ended up being the star of the show, and started realizing, this may be something that I want to pursue as a career. He had just started the coming out process. Like, he was right when he turned 18, basically. He grew up as kind of the cowboy way, as they say, in the Wranglers and the button-down shirts and all of that stuff. And then when he turned 18, he started wanting to explore his new identity a little bit more, and started going out to S4. You can get in on certain nights when you're 18, and so he started doing that. He started developing a whole new friend group, and then that later on came back to bite him in trial.
Because his parents did not know.
His parents, so there's conflicting stories about that. Brandon said that his dad had known for several months because he was going out with this guy, older guy, actually, who was in his 30s, and his dad had met him, and he had told him, hey, I'm staying over at his house, and his dad kind of asked him about it, and he didn't deny it and didn't confirm it, but it was his dad it was understood. His mom, there's still kind of nobody can really say for sure if she knew or not, but it was kind of it was the understanding that
Mom
she
is
knew.
one of those things moms know.
Yeah, you may not talk about it, but
the moms know.
they kind of know.
But
Yeah.
sounds like they probably both knew. It was just never really talked about.
Right.
What kind of relationship did they have?
They had a wonderful relationship. In fact, I have in the documentary, there's several pictures of Norma, Brendan's mom's name was Norma. She was out there filming him at his FFA events. And, so they spent a lot of time together. They were very close because they had this animal connection. Brandon was, he loved animals. He loved horses. And
Now, the part of Heath that I know is the part right on the lake. It's mansions along the lake. Did they live there, or did they live inland a little bit?
It was like the main street. It's here we are 13 years later. This all happened in 2005. So Heath wasn't built up as well as it is now. But the main street that went through was like right across from, I think there's a school, maybe an elementary school or something. So it was right there on like Lawrence Drive.
So
right
they
on the
had some
main
land
street.
to keep animals.
Not there. They only had about, I think it was like a half an acre or something. No, they had a barn in the back, but it pretty much, the land just kind of encompassed the barn and the house. And that's one of the reasons that they were actually moving out to Roy City, because they had a couple acres out there. And Norma did own a horse, and she wanted some land to keep the horse and other animals.
Okay, so let's go to the other side of this personality conflict between he's coming out as gay and he went to Abilene Christian University, which isn't the friendliest school in the world for gay people to go to.
To say the
not
least,
at all.
yes, correct. And he had struggles out there because they have very strict rules. You have a curfew every night. Homosexuality is against their bylaws. It actually says in their charter, school charter, that we believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, and anything outside of that is sin. And
Was it sinful to be black too? I just
don't know.
don't get
Probably
these
long
things.
time
Back
ago.
then, it probably was.
Yeah.
But they had, there was a lot of rules, and because of that,
Why did he go to
struggling.
this school?
He went to it because of his best friend that he kind of grew up with and was very close with. Decided that he wanted to go out to Abilene Christian. He was his friend's name was Eric, and he was actually in. His dad was a preacher, and he was on the track to go. In fact, to this day, he still works as I think a youth pastor or something for a
The
church.
friend does.
Yeah, the friend does. And so he was going to Abilene Christian to start that career in religious studies and all of that. So Brandon didn't really know where he wanted to go. He was he's an 18-year-old kind of fly-by-night kid. He just kind of woke up in the morning and did what Brandon wanted to do. He didn't.
Like we all did.
I wasn't out in high school, but I knew I did not want to go to a conservative school.
I didn't either, but that's actually really nothing new. A closet case who's going to a really religious school. Did any of his friends at Abilene Christian know, or was he out too? Maybe just a select few?
Not really, and that was part of what came back to bite him. During trial was they
That he
would
was
bring
living
the
a double
friends
life.
in, and the friends were like, we kind of knew, maybe we had an inkling about it, but we didn't really know. No, he didn't tell us.
It was
or
never
admit
confirmed by him.
Right, exactly. But he was starting to, dress with Armani clothes and, starting to be a little more metrosexual, as they call it back then. I'm not sure if they still then. I'm not hip with the kids these days, but
I think so.
He had another part of his life, though, that was something. Well, Lerone, you used to do this, and that was he was making porn.
well, he was in adult films, yes.
Okay, let's call it that.
Oh, wow.
And that was kind of a part of his emerging sexuality. Like he was basically was at a club. He was at S4, And there were some producers there that kind of approached him and said, hey, have you ever thought about doing adult films or anything like that?
Because he was a cute kid. Did you see the pictures?
Yeah, he's a cute kid.
Yeah. Everybody, you know, when he got on the dance floor and did the little dance contest, like he was usually the star of the show. Like he was out there. And
there's one story in a book that has come out about it. Now, this book has nothing to do with your documentary. The book is called Railroaded: The Homophobic Prosecution of Brandon Woodruff for His Parents' Murders.
Right.
It's by Philip Crawford, and I guess it's available on Amazon. Just recently came out.
Yes.
So there's one scene in this book where he went to S4 with some friends who were straight who didn't know that he was gay.
Yeah.
And at S4, they still weren't sure whether he was, because he was dancing with guys, he was dancing with girls, you know. He was just out there dancing and being Brandon.
And if you're listening, you're probably wondering, why are straight people going to S4? They do.
Oh,
do, absolutely.
Lots of straight, especially on nights when 18 and older can get in.
Well, it just has the reputation of having one of the best dance floors in Dallas.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of people that they go out there. You know, they go with their gay friends or they go by themselves or whatever, and they literally just go to dance and to have fun. Yeah.
But one of his friends that he was there with, it describes him as being confused because Brandon was dancing with guys, he's dancing with girls, so he wasn't sure whether, you know, he's just dancing.
Right.
And
just
that was
being
actually
Brandon.
that was actually I think you're talking about the night of the murders.
That might have been,
because he went out with his friend Robert, who he came to Dallas with because, in fact, he wasn't even actually going to come to Dallas this weekend. But this friend Robert was like, hey, I want to visit my girlfriend in Denton. You know, do you mind riding with me? And he's like, yeah, I guess. So he came in on Friday after class and dropped his friend off in Denton and came down and spent the weekend with his parents and his girlfriend at the time, and you know, things that you know, he just basically, that's the only reason he came in. And so then when they met back up Sunday night to go back to school, he's like, hey, I'm going by this club, do you want to go? And Robert was like, you know, sure. You know, didn't really say, hey, I'm going to a gay club. He said, I'm going to this club and we're going to meet up with some friends. And that's what happened. Is, you know, this very straight, religious, whatever friend went with him. And yeah, he was confused. Like, he's dancing with everybody.
So at the time of the murders, was Brandon living on campus or was he living still with his parents?
He was living on campus. So he would basically come back every weekend just to help out with his parents. Because like I said, they were moving from one house to the other, so he would help them out with you know, chores around the house.
It sounded like he'd help take care of the animals. If they were out in Royce City, he'd be in his in the Heath house and take care of the animals.
Right, exactly. He would do whatever they wanted. Like I said, that relationship was still very strong. And so when he would come into town, he'd visit all of his friends. You know, he'd go visit his friends, the church friends and the school friends, you know, high school friends, and then he would go out and visit with his club friends.
You know, not to belabor the point about Abilene Christian, but did he get into any trouble for being gay out there?
Not for being gay, because he was very very sure to not be too obvious, I guess, you know, like, so he hid it. He was still very closeted, especially when he went back to school. The only time that he was really comfortable being himself was when he was at the club. You know, when he was hanging out with his girlfriend and he was hanging out with his high school friends and all of that. Like, he did not.
And also when he was hanging out doing adult films.
Well, yeah, and that's, I guess you could say he was comfortable then as well.
So we're coming up on a break in just a couple of minutes. Then what happened this weekend? He claims he was at the house in Heath, and from there, you know, let the bird out, let the dogs out, put them away, and then picked up his friend Robert, and they went to S4. So he picked up his friend Robert up in Denton.
Well, he actually ended up meeting him because Brandon was not very good with directions. And it wasn't 2005. You didn't have GPS on every phone, so he had to call and say, hey, I'm lost. I don't know where I'm going. So they ended up actually meeting at a Denny's here in Dallas off of 635. But
but he went to North Dallas, and from there they went to Oak Lawn.
Right.
Okay.
Well, they went to a friend's house and then
and then went to a friend's house first, and then Oak Lawn. Okay.
Yeah. And that's the thing that also and is, you know, when Brandon was first telling his story, and you know, because they asked him during the interview, at first it was like, okay, tell us about the family, tell us about you, tell us about all this, and then they started going in and trying to get him on a timeline, and that's where everything kind of fell apart.
Okay, but what happened to his parents?
So, unfortunately, his parents were both shot and stabbed. The dad was shot once in the mouth and pretty much killed him instantly, and he was, they determined he was actually stabbed post-mortem. And then his mom was shot 5 times, and then she was stabbed.
The first shot,
Wow.
it looked like it was through her hand, so
Very
the way
Defensive.
that it was almost defensive. So he was probably shot first, then she realized what was going on, and she put her hand up, shot her through the hand, but then the others through chest and head, I think.
Right.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, she was shot in the neck and face.
Now, was she stabbed?
She was stabbed as well. They were both stabbed and shot.
And they can tell that it was not, that wasn't the cause of murder, that the gunshots were, so the gunshots were first by the amount of bleeding, I guess.
Well, the forensic examiners were unable to determine the exact cause of death. Basically, they just said multiple stab wounds and multiple gunshot wounds. They were not able to really determine which happened first, except for in Dennis. They were able to determine that the one shot
Killed him instantly.
it didn't kill him instantly, but it hit his cervical vertebrae, so it would have at least paralyzed him and would have paralyzed his respiratory. So even if that didn't penetrate or the brain or anything like that, just not being able to breathe would have killed him within a few minutes.
Yeah, so even if he didn't get stabbed, he would have died from that.
Exactly, correct.
Okay. We need to take a break. We're talking about the murder of Dennis and Norma Woodruff. In 2005, their son Brandon is accused of the murder, or was convicted of the murder.
Yeah.
He's been in state prison for 12 years now.
Almost 13. Next month will be
Almost 13. Well, 13 since the murder.
Yeah.
He was in local jail for a couple of years.
3 years, yeah.
Till the trial took place, so he's been in state prison for over 10 now.
Right.
This is Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with Lerone Landis. We'll be back with more Lambda Weekly as soon as I cue up the ads correctly.
Josh isn't here.
The PSA is Josh is not here today.
Yeah.
Can you tell? We'll be back with more Lambda Weekly right after this.
Hey guys, I'm C.D. Curvin, and you're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 KNON FM.
And this is Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with Lerone Landis. Patty has the day off. She's down marching in the parade with some of her friends who have been on our show, actually. We are talking about the murder of Norma and Dennis Woodruff. Took place in 2005. Their son, who is gay, is in state prison, convicted of the murder. And our guest is Scott Poggensee. He is making a documentary about it that's going to be shown at the Texas Theater on
September 24th, a week from tomorrow.
From tomorrow, and it's at 6 o'clock. Texas Theater is on Jefferson Boulevard. Is there a cost to come in and see it?
There is not. It's actually free admission, free valet service. I've paid for all of that. I just basically am looking for people's feedback because it's a work in progress film. So
it's such work in progress that we're being filmed right now in the studio.
We are. I feel like I'm on a reality show.
You can edit that out. I'm telling Tommy, the videographer. You can edit that out. But we're being filmed right now.
Absolutely.
So,
Just before the break, we kind of just talked about up to the murders. Now let's talk about some of the specifics and the timelines. We know that the night of the murders, he was at S4. But what time were the bodies even found? That night or the next day?
So the murders theoretically happened shortly after 9:30 at night on Sunday, the 16th of October, 2005. The reason they think that is because Norma, the mom, was talking to her mom, Brandon's grandmother, on the phone until 9:30 at night. And then that was the last anybody heard of from them.
So it had to be after that.
It had to be after that, but before work the next morning, because they didn't show up to work on Monday morning. And Monday morning was just kind of the family kind of didn't really think much of it. They were just, okay, maybe they're sick, maybe they're just not, answering phone calls or whatever. But then they didn't show up.
But everybody agreed that wasn't really normal for them to just not call in, not show up.
And it's one of those things where they just kind of kept calling. It's like, okay, well, we're not really that concerned. We'll just call again, and then I'll call in a couple hours.
Did they call anybody from the family at work?
No, work didn't call. Work never actually called, because they didn't show up to work the next morning on Tuesday morning either. And that's when everybody started getting concerned. Like, wait a second, this is really not like them. So that's when they actually called. I think it was like around noon or so. They called the work and they asked, have they showed up? And they said no. And then that's when they called a family friend. The family friend.
By then, they knew that it was either something serious, like a very serious auto accident. Those two were in a coma in some
hospital or something. Yeah.
They knew it had to be at least that.
So we're going on almost 48 hours before their bodies were found.
Right at 48 hours, pretty much.
And how were the bodies found?
So Brandon's sister, Brandon, a couple aunts, they started calling around. They couldn't get any answers, so they called a friend, a family friend named Todd. And Todd was at work, but he was close. Everybody else, Brandon was in Abilene. Charla, the sister, was in Arkansas. Everybody was in Texarkana. So they called Todd. He's like, okay, yeah, I'll go out there and check on him.
And Todd is who?
Todd, he's just a family friend, but he worked there in Rockwall. He was I think he's a county extension agent or something like that, whatever that does. And he, so he's like, yeah, I'll go out and check on him. He enlisted one of his coworkers to go with him named Ron, and they drove out to the house. They had to pretty much break into the house. But then they found the bodies and called the police.
So that shows us, if they had to break into the house, whoever had broken in to shoot them locked the door behind them.
Right. There was a switch lock, one of those little turn locks.
Okay, so who had a key to the house other than Norma and Dennis?
There were several people that had keys to the house, but really the working theory is that that Norma and Dennis let in whoever it was. Nobody really theorized that somebody just, got a key and opened it and ran in or anything like that. It was more the scene made it look like.
But had it been Brandon or his sister Charla, they could have done that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they could have come in, opened the door, come in, and shoot him. So that's the first piece of evidence that it could have been Brandon.
It could have been Brandon. Could have been someone they knew. Absolutely.
Did many other people have keys to the house?
I believe a couple of the aunts did, but as far as I know, there weren't a lot of people.
Okay.
It was very in the inner circle. It wasn't like
so. The other part of this is, if they had let somebody in, weren't they both sitting on the sofa when
they were
shot?
And one of the theories, and in the film, we actually do a reenactment of what the forensics show happened that night, because obviously nobody will ever know except for the people that did it, and Dennis and Norma. And obviously Dennis and Norma can't tell us, so we have to look at the forensics. And so the forensics show basically that they were held at gunpoint on the couch. So they were being held hostage, if you want to call it that way, at gunpoint.
So we don't think that it was somebody who they were just watching TV, somebody snuck in and just shot him.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't sound that way. And the only reason is because Dennis was shot in the face, very close range, within 6 to 8 inches of his mouth, and they were sitting next to each other, which by all accounts they didn't normally do. They actually had 2 couches there and another chair to sit on. So by all accounts they weren't they'd been married for 20 years at this point.
They weren't in their normal positions. Normally, each
They
one
didn't
would
snuggle up
sprawl
against
out.
with each other. Yeah, exactly.
They'd normally sprawl out each one on a sofa.
Right. So the fact that they were sitting together on the couch basically shows that they were being held at gunpoint at some point.
So it doesn't appear that this was what do you call it? A house ambush,
Like a robbery
Yeah.
or something like that.
Right.
I mean, it could have been, it could have been, hey, you guys sit on the couch and I'm going to take all your stuff.
But things weren't missing.
There were some things missing, but the police didn't realize it at the beginning. So basically, Dennis's wedding ring was missing. There was report of a computer that was missing, but all of that came out afterwards. And it was not stuff that you would normally think. Like there was a laptop laying there, there was another computer, there was TV still there. So it didn't look like it was, an organized thing.
and they were still in transition. So I'm assuming a lot of things may have still been in boxes.
Still in boxes and still over at
Still
the
at the
other
old
house.
house.
And yeah, this was not a fully moved into house.
So
at that point.
it wasn't as easy to figure out what was missing, but a
Right.
wedding ring you can tell is missing.
Right, exactly.
So that would indicate, since there wasn't a lot of stuff missing, robbery doesn't seem to be the motive.
It doesn't seem to be. It may have been in the beginning, and then things just went bad and they freaked out and left, but we'll never know that. But it doesn't look to be, no. It looks like whoever was there to kill him.
Does it look like one person did it?
Well, I actually have a study that I show in the documentary that shows that 90.1% of all homicides that involve 2 or more weapons, which is in this case would be a gun and a knife, that 90.1% of those are committed by multiple perpetrators. So the fact that the police zeroed in on Brandon as a single person that just, went off the deep end and wasn't enough to shoot him, he had to go back and stab him. It didn't make sense as far as even statistics to begin with.
Now, if Brandon had a gun, did Brandon have access to guns, and was he a good shooter?
By all accounts, from what everybody that they talked to said, Brandon didn't even know how to use a gun. In fact, one person even said that they believe that Brandon at one point asked them, well, if I put the bullet in backwards, will it shoot me? So,
Wow.
yeah, by all accounts, he had no training with handguns or
What
anything
about with
like
knives?
That. Not that we can find.
And I mean, I think I know the answer to this. Does he have any kind of violent past?
He does not.
Did he have any bipolar past or anything like that?
Nothing like that.
That this personality might have come out. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be a motive that Brandon would have done it.
Right.
Correct.
Does there seem to be a motive that his sister or anybody else in the family might have done it?
I mean, there's been theories of people that, like the sister, for example, did have a very psychiatric past. She had been locked up in Green Oaks and the C Center up in Plano several times against her will. And she had to sign documents that said, I will not hurt myself or my family before they would let her out.
Interesting.
And so there is this past that we'll definitely bring out in the documentary that she had, at least an unstable past at the very least.
So 48 hours has gone by. The bodies have been discovered. Does Brandon and his sister and the aunt, are they all notified and learned of the murders at the same time?
So the police basically called them and said, hey, your parents have been found dead. But they did not give any details. It was basically like, yes, we've confirmed they're dead. That's it. Everybody converged in Texarkana because that's where everybody lived. Mm-hmm. The grandparents, the aunts, and Charlie lived in Arkansas. So everybody kind of went to the aunts and the grandparents' house in Texarkana. In fact, Brandon, he was in Abilene at the time, and a friend of his actually chartered a plane and flew him to Texarkana because he was so distraught that he had to get back. He didn't want to wait that 3 or 4 or 5 hour drive to drive back.
And that was my next question. Did they, anywhere in the police report, did they notate how Brandon responded when they told him?
Well, not in the initial arrest warrant because they hadn't talked to the friends at that point. Brandon was arrested 5 days after the bodies were found. And at that point, they had not talked to...
Okay, 5 days after the bodies were found, so 7 days after the murder.
Correct.
So it was the following Sunday.
They were found on on a Tuesday. He was arrested on Monday. So it was six days that he was arrested, but 5 days when they started preparing the arrest warrant. So they actually got him the next day.
How quickly did they, after interviewing him, how quickly did they prepare the arrest warrant?
Well, that's one of the things that's contested or that's looked at. That's kind of showing the police in this, having blinders on mentality is when Brandon, you can see Brandon very distraught in the interview with the Texas Rangers because he's telling them, please check out my alibis, check out the phone records, check out the toll records, talk to the people that I was with that night. You will see that I was not there.
Okay, so this is what we're not understanding. He was at the house in Heath. Takes a half an hour to get out to Royce City. From Royce City, he wouldn't have had time to get back to Dallas, to North Dallas, to the Denny's that he picked up his friend Robert, and then get back down to Oak Lawn in the time that he actually did this. Where are the phone records that showed? Because he called from Heath, he called his friend Robert, right?
Right. So there's actually, so I think I can kind of sum it up and give you kind of what the police were thinking and what Brandon was thinking at the time. When Brandon talked to the police, it was on that Sunday, so 5 days after the bodies were found. And, at this point, they're asking him to recollect, when did you do this? When did you come over and see your parents? When did you go do this? And he's telling them, so I can't give you an exact time. But they kept hammering, and they kept, okay, so you say that you saw your parents that night, you had pizza, you had dinner, you left around 7, you went over to the Heath house, that would have taken about 25-30 minutes, then you fed the dogs, that probably would have taken another 30 minutes, and then you went and met Robert, and then you went to the club. So they're pinning him down on this time, and he's telling him, I don't know. And finally, he's just like, okay, sure, that makes sense to me. I'm sitting here thinking, okay, that makes sense. Takes about 30 minutes. So he's like, okay, that sounds good. And then when they went back and compared it with the notes that they had, they realized that Brandon was off on his time by about an hour. And so when he said, he left at 10 or at 8, like 8:30 or so, well, they had
from Royce City,
from the Heath house. So
to go to North Dallas.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so he was at the Royce City house but left about 7.
8:30 left the Heath house, but the murder couldn't have taken place till after 9:30.
Well, the problem is that they had a neighbor at the Heath house that said that they saw Brandon there between 10 and 10:30. And that's where all of this started to unravel, because that was the time that Brandon was there. He just happened to spend he spent like an hour or two at the Heath house, letting out the dogs, feeding the dogs, taking care of the animals, straightening the house, letting his bird out. He had a cockatoo that you had to play with, or he would like eat his own feathers. I mean, it was like one of those things where he had to spend a significant amount of time. He just didn't have that time narrowed down in his mind when he's trying to think about a week ago. I don't even know what I had for lunch yesterday, let alone where I was, a week ago.
But that was at the Heath house.
Yes. Where are the phone records?
Well, so then, so Brandon's telling them, please check out the phone records, check out the alibis, all of that. And the Rangers telling him, say, yes, we're going to check it. We're going to talk to your friends. We're going to check out the phone records. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And then, so he's thinking, okay, when he's leaving the police department, he's thinking, okay, well, they're going to check it all out. They're going to realize it's not me. Everything's fine. But Ranger Jeffrey Collins, he's the one that did the lead on the investigation. He puts in his report that as soon as Brandon left the police department, he started preparing that arrest warrant. He never checked out the alibis. He never checked out the phone records. He didn't even get the phone records till several months later.
So from get-go, they had him in sight as the suspect.
Right. So they had. So
did they get phone records from that night?
They did get phone records from that night, and so they actually. But it ended up that conveniently, the phone records from pretty much that morning until later that night were missing. So they turned him over to the court, and they were like, hey, the phone records that show where Brandon actually was, guess what? They're not here. We don't know where they're at.
Okay,
How can they be missing?
Well,
I mean, that's something that the
that's
phone
a really
company-
good question.
The phone company can just, okay, you lost them. Here's another copy of them.
Yeah, well, and so their theory was this was the time that AT&T and Singular were merging, and so basically their theory was that they were on an AT&T tower, but he had a Singular phone, so that was why they didn't turn over the tower records and all of that stuff. But it really doesn't make sense because they had AT&T records from previous days and days afterwards. So, but the problem is, and this is one of the biggest blunders in the investigation, because they had waited 6, 8, 10, 12 months before they started analyzing these records, they couldn't go back to the phone company and say, hey, we need another copy, because they destroy those records after just a few months.
They do. That is correct.
Yeah, so that was the big, and Brandon sitting in prison or in jail at that point going, what? Like, that is the one thing.
That's the thing that would
prove
prove
that
where he was.
innocent.
And you're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 Knon FM. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with Lerone Landis. We are talking about the murder of Norma and Dennis Woodruff. They were killed in October 2005, and their son, who is gay, and we're going to bring that in the final segment of the show, why I keep saying that, because it figured into the prosecution. Their son, who's gay, has been in state prison ever since. We'll be back with more Lambda Weekly right after. It would be nice if we could do that. Why is this not playing? And because, we really want to hear these announcements. Let's try this one.
Are you getting this on film?
Okay. Laurent, I'm going to play with the board for a minute.
All right. So, this timeline thing, it sounds to me like one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle would actually be Brandon's grandmother. Because didn't you say that his mom was talking to her? That was the last person that's how they got down the timeline of when they were probably murdered, around 9:30-ish?
Yeah, it would have to be after 9:30 because that was the time that the grandmother said that she hung up with Norma.
Okay, why don't we try this one more time, and otherwise we're just going to give up on these.
I'm Michael Dominguez, and you're listening to Lambda Weekly, 89.3 Knon FM.
And this is Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with Lerone Landis and a board that is working perfectly. Our guest is Scott Poggensee. He has made a new documentary, or is in the middle of making a new documentary. It'll be shown as a work in progress on the 24th of September at the Texas Theater at 6 p.m.
So just before the break, we were talking about the timeline, and it appears to me that one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle, in absence of these phone records, would be Brandon's grandmother, because she spoke to her daughter
at 9:30.
Around 9:30, and where she asked, okay, did she know if Brandon was in the house around that time?
Yeah, she actually did. They asked the grandmother, they said, hey, did you ask, was Brandon there? Like, they're trying to narrow it down to show that he was there. And she actually, surprisingly to the police, came back and said, yes, I asked Norma if Brandon was there. And she said, no, he was not there.
Interesting. So why?
Okay, so the only evidence that we really have of whether or not he was there is somebody who said he wasn't there.
Yeah.
And they didn't, and I guess the cops didn't believe it?
They just ignored it. At this point, Brandon had already been arrested. You got to also realize that 99% of the investigation that took place in this was after Brandon was arrested. So because they arrested him so quickly, everything came to the point of, does this show Brandon's guilty? If yes, we'll keep it. If no, we'll ignore it. And there was actually an instance about a year or so after that one of the guy that found the bodies, Todd, came to Ranger Collins and said, hey, you you got this wrong. Brandon didn't do this. You need to give a polygraph test to this guy, Mike. You need to give a polygraph to this guy's Mike's mom, Norma. You need to look at those guys.
It's different Norma.
Different Norma, yeah. There was a Norma Etherington and a Mike Etherington. They were kind of in the mix. You could say if anybody was ever looked at as a suspect, as an additional suspect, it was them. But it was very quick. Because Brandon was friends with them at one point, and with Mike and his mom Norma, and they had a falling out, and Norma Woodruff and Norma Etherington had a feud. I mean, that, like I said, they were looked at very shortly
and
by the police.
Decided
then they actually even interviewed Mike, and but the interview with Mike was more, hey, give us some dirt on Brandon, than it was, hey, were you there? You know?
And he was happy to give dirt on him because they had this falling out. But what is the evidence that they might have done it?
Well, the only
not accusing people, just what evidence might there be?
Well, at the point that they interviewed him, there really wasn't a lot of evidence other than the fact that they had called when the bodies were first found. It was on a Tuesday night. They went to autopsy Wednesday morning. Before the police even left, before the police even got out of the autopsy, Norma Etherington called the sheriff's department and says, hey, I have information on the Woodruff murders. And the point is, how do you even know there's been a murder at this point? We don't even know that it's a murder. We just got out of the autopsy. We have no idea if it's a murder.
And none of this has been released to the press yet.
None of it has been released to the press. None of it's been released to the family.
Wow.
The family still didn't know what happened to them. The police didn't even know. They hadn't even left the autopsy yet.
So we have about 10 more minutes to go.
It does go quick.
It does. So the trial.
Mm-hmm.
Good jury?
If you're
a question, if there ever was one.
If you were a straight white male, yes, probably a really good jury. The problem was that it was in Hunt County. At that point, it was very conservative, very religious. The way that Catherine Ferguson puts it, and his trial attorney says, you can't throw a rock in Greenville without hitting a church.
Did they ask for a change of venue?
I actually addressed that in the film as well. It's kind of a long explanation, but basically, if you do ask for a change of venue, you don't get to ask for where you go. So they can't say, well, we want to go to Dallas, or we want to go. You ask for a change of venue, and then they put you wherever they want. They could put you in Collin County and Rains County, and possibly a county that would be more conservative.
Right. So it's a roll of the dice.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So what was wrong with this jury?
Well, they, as Philip also says in his book, they were very they look down upon homosexuals as basically inferior, and they actually say in there that they would tend not to believe somebody just because they're gay, and so eight people that answered on their questionnaire that yes, I have a problem with the morality of homosexuality, were actually allowed to be on the jury.
Why?
And that's a great question. That's one of the things that Philip addresses in his book as well. And I actually have an excerpt from his book in the film that says basically, why would it be okay to put 8 people that view homosexuality as wrong on a jury for a gay boy? Would it be the same as somebody that if they had a black defendant and there was like 5 or 8 white supremacists, because they all basically said, yeah, we can ignore that. Like, I don't believe homosexuality is moral. I don't believe it's right, but we can ignore that and look at the evidence.
Okay,
it's the same exact thing. If there was a white supremacist that says, oh yeah, well, I can just ignore the fact that he's black.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It just doesn't work that way.
So basically, we are coming up on the end of the show. He was convicted,
mm-hmm.
and it sounds like he was convicted for being gay, not for an actual murder.
He literally was convicted only for being gay because they demonized his coming out process. The fact that he had these 2 sets of friends. He had the friends that he went to the clubs with, and he had the friends that he went to church with, and he went to high school with, and all of them. And the fact that he had these 2 sets of friends, the prosecution's narrative throughout the whole trial was, well, if you can lie about being gay, if you can lie about yourself, if you can lie about your sexuality, your orientation, then you can lie about killing your
So
parents.
according to the prosecutor, it is better to come out when you're 12 and just leave
maybe
an
not in
honest
Hunt
life.
County, but yeah.
Were any of his friends called as witnesses?
And that's one of the things that I actually addressed as well with Catherine, the trial attorney. She basically said that, you cannot present witnesses during the guilt innocent phase that says he's a good guy, because basically that has nothing to do with whether or not he killed his parents.
But like his friend Robert, who could have said, no, I was on the phone with him at
well, they did, and they did call some of the college friends and people that had direct knowledge of the case. And in fact, that's actually one of the things that when they brought these other witnesses, they were able to say, yeah, I called at this time. But as I very I take a really good look at the timeline in the film, and we spend a lot of time on it, and basically I prove that there is literally only 14 minutes that Brandon was quote unquote not accounted for between the toll records, the phone records, the drive time. So within that 14 minutes, he would have had to have stabbed both of his parents over a dozen times, shot them 5 or 6 times, taken a shower, changed clothes, cleaned up the crime scene.
Taking a shower and because he would have had blood on him.
Right. It was a very, very bloody scene, and there was blood actually dripped all the way from the couch to the bathroom, but there was no blood found in the bathroom. So that shows that somebody spent a significant amount of time cleaning up that bathroom. You cannot just, they did luminol, they did everything trying to find blood in that bathroom. They couldn't find anything. And one of the things that proves Brandon's innocent more than anything is the fact that they found water, standing water in the sink when they've discovered the bodies. And anybody that's taken a shower, when you get in the shower the next morning, it's completely dry. The water in the sink and the bathtub and all that would have dried within 24 hours. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they found standing water in the bathtub and in the sink shows that somebody was in that house within 24 hours of those bodies being found. And at that point, we know where Brandon was.
So we know somebody came back.
Yes, they had to have come back the next night to clean up the crime scene.
Wow. They came back the next night.
That's why we feel like it was somebody.
And after then, it's, I guess, undisputed that Brandon was not in town.
Correct. He was with friends. He was with multiple people. He was at S4. He was driving back to college.
But it came out at the trial that he was at S4.
Right. All of that, everything that Brandon said when he was talking to the Rangers, every event that he said was verified by multiple people. The only thing that was brought up was the fact that he was off on the fact that he said it was between 8 and 9 when it was really between 10 and 10:30.
But it came up at the trial that he was at S4.
Right.
Yeah.
What did that have to do with anything?
Well, that was what they used to show that was how they got the whole gay issue into it. And in fact, Ranger Collins, he told Ranger Collins, I went to a club that night. And he said, okay, which club did you go to? And he said, well, I went to S4. And he said, and so Ranger Collins just kind of, wrote it down, S4 is where you went, blah, blah, blah. Well, he came back later on and said, well, because Brandon didn't tell me that S4 was a gay club, he was hiding it. And it's like, no, hiding it means I told you I went to, 2000 down the street instead of going to S4. But he told him exactly where he went.
So when do you have to identify what type of club you're going to?
Right. Mm-hmm. Just because he didn't say I went to S4 by the way, I
went to the Lizard Lounge. It's a straight club.
It's a straight.
I've worked with some detectives translating who were working on a murder case, translating from gay into police because they're two different languages. So
right.
I get that.
We need a translator.
Why didn't they tell me? Okay, so did they bring up his adult film career?
They did bring that up. Well, they brought it up in what's called, in the pre-trial, they filed this motion. It's called a motion or a notice of extraneous offenses. And they brought all kinds of stuff. They brought the fact that he was in adult films. They brought the fact that his sister said that she used to whip him when they were kids. The fact that he had a maxed out credit card. Like they brought all this stuff.
Having a maxed out credit card's illegal?
It's not. That's the whole. And doing adult films is
Doing
not
adult
illegal
films
either.
is illegal?
The only reason that they put that in there was because they knew that the press would get it, and Brad Keller over at the Herald's Banner over in Rockwall, everything that the prosecution put out, he would issue it. He would release it in the paper the next day.
So basically, this was just a major character assassination.
That's all it was. It was the only reason that he was arrested and the only reason he was convicted is because of suspicion, character assassination by other people, and just basically because he was gay.
And so after the trial, how many jurors were willing to speak?
I actually have 3 jurors on film, and so I was able to interview 3 of them, and luckily I was able to interview the one that was like the one holdout. When they went back to the jury room, it was pretty much 11-1, and she was the one that said, you guys haven't proven to me that he did this, but eventually the other jurors kind of
Convinced her it's time to go home.
is a good politically correct word. Yes, it convinced her to vote guilty.
Okay, so and we have a few minutes, and the next show isn't here yet, so so we don't need to rush on this. Well, what did you do? When did you first meet Brandon?
I did not meet Brandon until I wrote him a letter after he was convicted. I had heard about the case because he was a friend.
10 years, though.
This was so he was, in 2005 is when it happened. He was convicted in 2009. I wrote him a letter in 2010-ish.
So 8 years. So it's not like you just heard about this case and...
Oh, no, I didn't just hear about this case yesterday. I actually knew about the case when it first happened because Brandon was a friend of a friend. So I just followed it through Google searches and just kind of, looked up the case every couple months just to see what was going on with it. And then, like I said, in 2009, I just happened to do a Google search one day and saw that he was convicted, and I shook my head. I was just like, this doesn't make sense. This guy, he's proclaiming his innocence. He's proclaimed his innocence from day one. No matter what pressure the police put on him, he never varied from his story. Everything is exactly the way that he said it since day one.
And there's no evidence.
And there's no evidence.
There's no evidence.
Well, he's gay.
Exactly.
And did they find any other biological evidence of a third person?
So the thing that convinced the last juror was about 2.5 years later after the murders happened. One of Brandon's aunts was searching through the house in Heath, the barn in Heath, and they found this 18-inch sword that they theorized, oh my God, we have a medieval type sword, and Brandon used to work with horses at medieval times. This has got to be the murder weapon. And they took this sword, even though the forensic pathologist said, there's no way that this sword could be involved because number one, the cuts on the body are single-edged. This is a double-edged sword. The deepest wound we have is 5 3/4, and this is an 12 to 13-inch blade. And I mean, there was all kinds of things that disproved it, but the prosecution still tried to bring that out as that was.
So he worked in medieval times here on Stemmons Freeway.
He didn't actually work there. He just worked with the horse trainer. Like I said, he was huge into paint horses and quarter horses.
I was wondering if he played the Queen or
I played the Queen. Yeah, no. That was a good one. Wow. He's playing the Queen now, not then.
So there is no evidence, and you've been following this all along. How likely is an exoneration?
At this point, the only thing that's going to get Brandon out of prison is for us to be able to get enough public support and enough awareness to his case to come out and put pressure on the courts to look at this case. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals just straight up refused to look at his appeal. And so the biggest thing that we're doing is we're going to try to get people next year, sometime around March or April, to go down to Austin, march on the courthouse steps, and tell the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, we need you to look at this case.
Hold on, let me just do our top of the hour just to keep us legal.
Okay.
And this is Lambda Weekly. The other show is coming in, so we're going to wrap this up in just a second. So there have been something over 2,000 exonerations in the last 2 decades.
Yes.
Of criminal appeals. You're working on a criminal appeal right now.
So there's the state venue and there's the federal venue. And what Brandon has currently active right now is he has a federal appeal with the Fifth Circuit down in Louisiana, basically because during the investigation or during the time that Brandon was in the county jail, the prosecutors intentionally recorded and listened to his phone calls between him and his attorney. It violated his Sixth Amendment rights. The Sixth Amendment of the Constitution guarantees that you're able to consult with your attorney in private without anyone else around. And the fact that they listened to those phone calls violated his constitutional rights. So they have this appeal going down in the courts. As far as the state, the only thing that at this point that's going to get him out is if the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals comes back and reverses their decision not to look at the case and actually decides to look at the appeal that's already been filed.
Is there any way the federal courts can get involved in this?
Absolutely. If the federal, so the appeal that's currently in front of the Fifth Circuit, we're basically just waiting for them to decide. They can do, literally, federal courts can do anything they want. They can vacate the conviction, they can send it back to the state court and say, we're overturning it and you're going to have to retry him. They can let him out the next day. They can pardon him, of course. The president has the ability to pardon. The federal government can get involved.
Lerone and the president are close. So
okay.
Yeah, that's my next question. Hey, we can always get see if 45 will pardon him. So,
well, we'll
you never know.
We'll see how that turns out.
Yeah.
Good. Scott Poggensee, your documentary will be shown at the Texas Theater on the 24th. That's
The
a week
24th
from
is
Monday. It's at 6 o'clock. It's free. It's a work in progress.
It is a work in progress. You can actually view the trailer at this point. It's at freebrandon.org/trailer, Trailer, and you can actually view the trailer for the film. It's about 3.5 minutes long. It'll tell you a little bit more about the film.
Thank you for
Awesome. Thank
being
you so
here.
much.
And
Thank you guys
as the
for having
story
me. I appreciate
progresses, if it does, I mean, the story could end up just being, and he sits in jail for the rest of his life. It's that bad.
It really is.
When new details come out, come back, let us know what's going on. For all of us here at Lambda Weekly, have a good week.